White people have culture. Learning about serial killers, that's y'all culture. So disrespectful being in these streets, acting like that ain't y'all shit, because it totally is. Because y'all talk about serial killers the way I talk about superheroes. Like Ted Bundy has gotta be y'all's Black Panther, for sure. He put up LeBron numbers. He was amazing.
Hey podcast, we got a question for you guys. Has the pandemic paralyzed your passions? If it has, we encourage you to listen to what our good friend and fellow comedian Chae Mejia has to say. For those of you that up until this point have been unfamiliar with Mr. Mejia and his work, let me fix that by filling you in. So he is a Seattle-based stand-up comedian and writer. He has written for Flex Magazine and Podaholics. He performs at theaters, clubs, and festivals, having won awards at those festivals along the West Coast. And he features for national headliners who have been seen on HBO, Netflix, and Saturday Night Live. For information on Chris and for his upcoming shows, you can find everything at www.chrismejia.com. And that is Chris, ChrisMejia. He can also be found on Instagram at Topher Mejia. That's like the last half of Christopher. So TOPHERMEJIA. And that is the same handle on TikTok and Twitter. And of course, Facebook as Chae Mejia. Ladies and gentlemen, we give you the magnificent Chae Mejia. All right, one more thing before we get started. My wife, Taylor, has reminded me to warn everybody.
I mean, maybe it's just the mother in me, but this isn't the most kid-friendly episode. See, James is crying.
All right, so if that's the case, then if you do have young kids, then I would encourage you to do what we're about to do, which is put these little guys to bed because they don't need to hear that shit.
Ever since I was little, I always very much loved making people laugh. Like that was like a drug to me. Like that was always just a need for me to make people laugh in every interaction. And then I went to performing arts school for elementary school and middle school. So I did drama and I acted in the plays. So it was like already off the bat, ever since I was a kid, not only did I never have like a fear of public speaking, but I also I wanted to be in front of people too. So it was just, it kind of like stemmed from that, where it was like a mixture of doing theater, being like loving attention, and like just being like the person who's commanding everyone's attention. And then ever since like I was in middle school, like I was just always so obsessed with stand-up. So it was just kind of like all those factors merged together to basically make me someone who like, the idea of doing stand-up wasn't scary to me. It was just always like, well, let's do it. Like I want to do stand-up. I want to try it. Let's go do it. And then it just stemmed from that. And that's why like sometimes too, people will tell me, they'll be like, oh my God, you do stand-up? Like to me, that's so scary. The idea of like speaking in front of people. And like sometimes I have to remember that like how like that's so commonplace that people have a fear of public speaking, which to me it makes no sense. It's like, hey, you just get up in front of people and you say words. Like if it's not stand-up, it's fine. You just got to say words. You don't have to be funny. People like you if you're funny, but yeah, it's definitely, there's like times where I have to remind myself of just like the thing, like doing stand-up in itself is such or just any, like whether it's music or like dance or anything like that, like to go on stage in front of people and perform, and especially perform stuff that you've created. Because it's like one thing if you do karaoke, like everyone's drunk, you're at a bar, like the whole point of karaoke is that you suck. Like you don't have to be good at. No, in fact, every time you're at karaoke and someone is has a beautiful voice and they sing really well, fuck them. Like, this is not, like, I'm sorry it didn't work out for you. This is not that. We all just want to drunkenly, like, sing the Fugees or something and just, like, forget about our shitty day at work. So, like, let's stop showing off. But so, like, aside from karaoke, like, any sort of, if you're getting on stage and you're performing in front of people, it's like I feel like everyone who does that should realize, like, what you're doing is kind of a superpower. Because, like, most people would, like, so many people would say, oh, I would much rather be put in bed with snakes than do public speaking. And it's like, I would much rather do public speaking than be 6 feet away from a snake. Like, that makes no sense to me. But yeah, that's where it stemmed from. I was kind of a kid who always liked, when I was little, being the center of attention, and I did theater and I was obsessed with comedy, and then just kind of seemed like a no-brainer to get into stand-up.
Yeah. Who were some of your biggest influences? You said you liked stand-up ever since middle school, and so obviously you had a lot of inspiration starting back then. I know you didn't start until you were in college, but who were some of the ones that really got that goal and that vision placed in your brain at such a young age?
Yeah, so it definitely, the influences for me, and like with anyone, with any sort of thing in life, your influences will always change as you get older and stuff. But I would say there's, in terms of the different stages, the first, whether I want to admit it or not, the first legitimate influence for me was George Lopez. And
wow, okay.
I say that because one of his stand-up specials, his first HBO one, was the first stand-up special I've ever seen. So I say that it was an influence because that was the first time in my life where, like, it clicked. This is something people can do. Like, you can go on stage and just tell jokes. And, like, and then, because he was the first one I've ever heard, like, I was obsessed with him. But then, like, by this point, I never listened to his comedy. I never seek out it. Nothing against George Lopez. Just me personally, I just grew out of that.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, he was my first influence because of the fact that, like, he was the first person to show me, oh, this is a career. Like, this is what you can do. Just get on stage and make people laugh. After that, I would say, like, once I started doing stand-up, I would just say, to fast forward to now, people who I consider influences are people who, like, their style of comedy or what they accomplish with their comedy is what I would hope to one day do with my comedy. Like, for example, I really like comedians like Michael Chae and Michelle Wolf, who I wouldn't say my style comedy is like theirs, but I find them as an influence because I feel like Michael Chae and Michelle Wolf really do a good job of, like, talking about progressive social issues, but doing it about it in a way that it doesn't come off as preachy. Like, it doesn't feel like you're doing a TED Talk. Like,
right.
What the important part of it is that it's a joke and they are on stage to make people laugh. And there's definitely people who, I'm not someone who I'm like, there's only one right way to do comedy and all that. I fully believe that comedy, similar to music, has evolved to the point where there's something for everyone. And I think oftentimes with comedy, or really any art form, people often forget that there's a huge difference between something being objectively bad and something being subjectively bad. In terms of evaluating quality, that there's a difference between objectively and subjectively. There is comedy of all forms that is objectively bad, but then there's some comedy that subjectively just isn't your thing and you're just not going to be into it. And I think being able to recognize that is important. And the reason why I say that is because there's some people who, they want their comedy to feel like a TED Talk. They like comedians who are just going on stage and just preaching, basically, and talking about like, this is bad and that's bad. And like, there's people who that's what they like and that's what they want. And I don't hate on that. Like, it's not for me, but I recognize that is a style of comedy that people do like. Me personally,
sorry to cut you off. Were you there at that open mic at Comedy Underground where there was a guy from LA that came up and he literally just went on a rant for 3 minutes and he didn't tell a single joke, and it was literally just a motivational speech. He's like, you know what, you guys need to encourage each other here, and you guys need, I want to say it was like a year ago, but I left there like, yeah, man, we need to unify here. You know? Just like I felt like I wanted to go work out. Like it wasn't funny, but like I was, and he's somebody that I wish I could remember the guy's name. He had a pretty powerful message, really. But so you're I've never heard it explained the way that you just explained it in terms of objective and subjective. That was actually something that I wanted to ask you too. So I'm glad that you started heading in that direction with where you're going with it.
Well, like really quickly to finish the thought though.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, you're good. I just want to say, like, the reason why I bring all of that up is because I do like the idea of like using your comedy to introduce new thoughts to people. Because like, I like the idea of where like if you do a joke about for example, a progressive topic to an audience who they may not necessarily agree with you, if you do it in a way that it's funny and the funny doesn't make it feel preachy, to me, what that does is like at the end of the day, not only did you make that crowd laugh, but at least there's a chance that they leave your show learning something new, or at least viewing a topic in a way they've never viewed it before. Yeah. Like a comedian who, when I started in Florida, like he was one of the bigger comedians in the scene, and now he lives in LA. That's what he always liked to do. Like he would do Trump jokes in Trump country, but he would do them in a way that it's like he's still getting his personal opinion on Trump across, and he's still, making his case, but he's doing it in a way that is funny to this crowd that is pro him, to where then they leave that show hearing him out, like hearing his point of view out, but it doesn't feel like, oh, well, you just preached to me on stage or this and that. Like that's the beautiful thing about humor, where like humor lets your guard down. And sometimes or it's just like, sometimes you're like for example, Michelle Wolf will have jokes about feminism, and like you'll hear the jokes and like you're laughing and it's funny, but then afterwards you're just like, oh, I didn't think about it that way before. And like that thought is like, to me, is so beautiful. And like I wouldn't feel like my comedy is there right now. Like I would feel like over the past year or two, I've started to learn what my voice is and like started to do jokes on stage that feel like me. But I feel like to get to that point where it's like I'm doing jokes like that, it's gonna take a while. But like I have some jokes that are like attempts of that. But like, as you grow as a writer and you get better, you learn your voice better, then you're able to do that. But like, I would say like, that's really what my influences are, of like, oh, that's what I want to be. I want to be someone who like, if I'm going to be able to capture people's attention, and if I'm going to have an ability to like leave an impact in someone's life, then I want to do it in a way where I'm making them laugh, but then also there's that small chance of maybe I'm helping them be a better person through my jokes.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned Michelle Wolf, and who is the influence that you mentioned?
Michael Chae.
Michael, it's A-E-L, and then how do you spell his last name?
Chae, C-H-E.
I'm not familiar with him yet, so I'm gonna go watch some of his content, and I'm gonna think of some of the things that you just said and keep those in mind when I do that. Awesome. Yeah,
he has a great special on Netflix called Matters. It's just called Michael Chae Matters. Michelle Wolf has an excellent Netflix special, and she has an excellent HBO special. Both are really funny.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. So when you mentioned that your favorite type of comedy is something that makes a progressive point with an underlying theme, and how it doesn't, something that doesn't come across preachy. Whether the audience agrees with your point of view or not, they at least didn't write off the argument because you went about it in a funny way rather than preachy.
Right.
Reminds me of one of Taylor's and my favorite business and leadership authors, John Maxwell. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's the #1 nonfiction author in the world. And he's always talked that humor is a key tool for any public speaker to use, whether it's sales presentation, business pitch, anything. Because while if somebody doesn't agree with your point of view, they leave going, oh, well, it was worth my time spent there was worthwhile because it was entertaining.
Exactly.
So at the very least, I still like you.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes to comedy, and like, it's not that it's not controversial to say this, but it's definitely like you have to be careful about when you say something like this. But like, if a joke is undeniable, like undeniably funny, theoretically, if your joke is going to be undeniable, you could do any topic, theoretically. And like, the reason why I say it's dangerous to say that is because then people use that excuse to be like, well, I'm going to talk about all of this offensive stuff because my jokes are funny. It's like, okay, maybe it's funny to a crowd that likes that humor. But what undeniably funny means is that no matter, like, you're never going to make 100% of people laugh. But an undeniably funny joke is a joke that like for example, if it's a dark joke, but it's undeniably funny, it's one of those where it's like, even if someone doesn't want to like it, they have that like that initial where they smile and then they're like, or even like the whole when people laugh but they cover their mouth or they go, oh, and oh is I'm laughing. It's a laugh. Like that's not, even though you're not ha ha going, oh, that is I am laughing, but there is something morally or subconsciously in me that doesn't feel comfortable with full on laughing. So I'm doing the kind of, oh, or like not a groan, but like that like kind of like that, like where they feel like I have to do this instead of laughing to feel like I'm a good person, when it's like you're still laughing. Like I still got you. Like it's
so if we were accountants, it would be like, instead of being paid in cash, which would be like a straight up outright laugh, it would be like being paid on terms. So it's like, it's still payment and it still should be tracked as revenue, but it's cold hard cash, like an actual laugh maybe. Right.
It's definitely that. So like that's what I mean by undeniable, and like sometimes people will use that to be like, well, it's joke and I made people laugh so I can talk about whatever. And it's just like, while theoretically you can, that's another thing too, where it's like, not the sidebar myself, but like that's another thing too, where oftentimes people will complain about, like they would say like cancel culture is ruining comedy. It's like, no, it's not. It's just people are just being vocal about the comedy they don't like. And like, you can go on stage and say whatever, but then that means you have to be willing to deal with the consequences that goes with saying whatever. It's like if you show up to someone's house and you just insult them over and over, like, yeah, you are free to do that. Like you have the right, but you also can't be upset if the person you're talking bad about is upset with you. Like that's just how life is. So like when people say like PC culture is like ruining comedy, I think that's the stupidest shit, because it's like, no, it's just like, if you're gonna say things about groups of people, or like if you're gonna say things about like religion or politics, anything like that, if you're saying an opinion, like you have to be willing to deal with the fact that there's going to be people who are going to be upset or offended by that. Now, how you react to that is completely up to you. That's just like what you have to deal with. So like, to go back to what I was saying before with the undeniable part, like you like, for example, like as a cheesy example, like 9/11. There can be like, you can make jokes about that, but there's obviously gonna be people who are like, that's too far, this is that. But if you have a joke that's undeniable, then you're making people laugh about something that theoretically they shouldn't be laughing about. But your joke is so undeniably funny that they're like that funny bone in them just can't help it but recognize that and laugh. And now what makes a joke undeniably funny? There's so many, it depends on the topic. And like what also depends on too is like, well, what's the subject of the joke about? Are you making fun of the victims? Usually if it's like an atrocity or like, or if it's just like, you know, something that, you know, severely hurts people, then if you're making fun of the victim, then like your joke's probably not, you know, it's gonna be considered punching down. It's gonna be something people might not like. But like, if you're making fun of a different aspect, or if you're making fun of how society reacts to that thing, that's a different story. So like, that's why sometimes I'm careful. I try to be careful about when I say you can make jokes about anything, because it's like, technically that's true. Like you can make jokes about really serious topics, but it's like the important distinction is, what are you making fun of in this topic? What are you talking about? What is the subject of the joke? Who's the butt of the joke? And like, if you're making fun of victims, then like that's gonna be punching down. But if you're making fun of the people who committed the bad things, as an example, or if you're making fun of how society in the world reacts to things, then you have some leeway. And then you know, maybe if your joke still doesn't work, then maybe, you know, you gotta work, because like the more serious a topic is and the more controversial it is, the more precise your wording needs to be to get a point across of just like, I'm not on stage to say ignorant shit for the sake of saying ignorant shit. Like I'm trying to make a point. And the more serious, like if you're just talking about apples, who gives a fuck? It's hard to offend people if you're talking about apples. If you're talking about like politics, then like you're gonna have to be a little bit more, you're gonna have to be more precise on like, are you just making fun of a politician for the sake of making fun of a politician, or are you trying to make a point? And if you're making a point, then it's like how you go about it. That's where like the art aspect of comedy comes in, that a lot of people don't really think about. They just think, oh, you're just going on stage and saying silly shit. And it's just like, no, like this is an art form. For the amount of dick jokes that they exist in this art form, there are people who are, it's truly a craft that they're treating it like that. And even then, dick jokes, there's great dick jokes out there. Just like how there's great period jokes. There's great pussy jokes. There's great shit jokes. Like, you can talk about anything. It's just about how are you going about it? Is it hacky? Is it original? Is it undeniable? That's like the important thing that people don't really think about.
Yeah. And you do a lot of, I guess you would call it dark humor too. So you probably had a bit more practice at how to navigate through it and how to word it correctly, because I don't do a lot of dark humor personally, because it's like I have no problem with it and I'll laugh. I have a lot of dirty jokes and I'll tell a lot of dirty jokes to friends and to family. That's kind of what we do at any Christmas or Thanksgiving and stuff. All the wives roll their eyes because they know that we're in the hallway telling jokes and stuff and they can hear us. But whenever I've said it on stage, it's never worked out. And I think I figured it out. It's just, it doesn't look like it should come to me. It could come from me. I've come up with some good jokes that like are about race. I mean, they're not racist jokes, but it's just, if you look at me like the joke isn't funny, yeah, but like it shouldn't come from me. So like I'll write the joke for somebody else that I feel like, oh, like that's something that, you know, so and so can say, but I'm like, I'm not gonna say it. So
right. No, and that's actually that's another aspect too. Like actually, well, first off, I find it funny that you think I do dark jokes, because I do, yeah, definitely for sure I do dirty jokes. That's for sure. Yeah. But I've never considered myself like I do like dark jokes or anything like that. I think dark humor is funny. I just think kind of like what you said, where like if I felt like if I went on stage to do dark jokes, people would look at me like, come on, bro, you're too smiley to be doing stuff like this. But no, you raise a good point of like that is another aspect of comedy where like sometimes you can write, and like for example, theoretically you could write an undeniably funny joke about race, but because of who you are, to get people to laugh to it, it's going to make it harder. Just like how if you're a man, you could probably make an undeniably funny joke about periods, but because you're a man, it's less likely to work because a lot of people are going to view it as it's not your place to talk about that.
Yeah, gotta write that and give it to a chick and let her do it or something.
Right. And it's one of those, for some people, that makes them upset because they're like, I should be able to talk about anything. Me personally, I'm like, if the joke is so good and I'm so determined for it to be told on stage, but it's not my place to tell it, then I would just run that joke by someone who it is their place to tell it. And if they like it and they want to do it, then the joke lives on. Like, it's, for me, it's like, if this joke gets to exist, whether it comes from my mouth or not, then like, dope. Like, I don't care. I'll just write a different joke. And like, that's another important reason of, that's what finding your voice on stage really means, where it's like, you're finding out what is the stuff that not only really truly comes from your point of view and represents your point of view, but then at the same time, what is stuff that like is your place to talk about? Because like I used to be like 3 or 4 years ago, every time I would try to do a dirty joke on stage, and it would never go well because it just felt like both the crowd and myself knew that I had no place to talk about like sex on stage. Whereas now it's different. Now like I do dirty jokes and it doesn't feel, there's no awkwardness to it. So like all of this to say, what you said is very true. Like sometimes you can have those funny stuff, but like it may not just be your place. It doesn't work because the crowd kind of looks at you and it's like, you don't look like the type of person who should be telling this type of joke. And like that can hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that coming from you too. I mean, you have a very relaxed, very peaceful stage presence, and so I was actually curious to hear that you were nervous your first set that you, because I can't see you being nervous really.
It's definitely and it took a long time to get to that point of like feeling confident on stage, and that's one thing that's like honestly like it's upsetting that because comedy has basically like paused and like live shows aren't a thing, at least here in the state of Washington.
Yeah.
Like that's one thing that's been upsetting, where it's just like, I put years of work into gaining confidence on stage, and now I've lost it because it's like I'm so rusty and I just don't feel like, you know, it's like you finally learn to ride a bike and then you can't yeah, sure, it's muscle memory, so you're able to get by, but you're not, maybe you're not
to get back into it though.
Right, exactly. Like things will still feel awkward when you're on the bike. And that's how, like, when I did my set today, that's how it felt, where it was like, I was able to do my set, but like, there was various beats in like my old jokes that I would do that just didn't hit the same way because I just lost that touch. And like, I'll be able to regain it back once performing is something that can be happening regularly. But it's definitely like, it takes so much, because like to be confident on stage, like one word of advice that I got was like, what really helps with being confident on stage is like going on stage with the understanding that you are the funniest person in the room, in the sense of between you and the audience. Like you're going what that confidence on stage is, it's you knowing that you are funnier than everyone that's in that audience. So you are the most deserving to have the microphone. And like, once you understand and once you believe that, there's a difference between understanding and then actually believing it. Once you believe that, then the confidence starts to pick on stage. And for me, it was like a mixture of finally learning my voice and doing jokes that felt more like me, like that I would say in conversation. It was like a mixture of that, and then like just seeing more like consistent success and like getting booked more. It was just like a combination of those things. And then as well as like I was experiencing a glow up as well, so I just felt better about myself too. All of those things kind of combined together, and like I was able to have the confidence on stage. And then now, since I don't do comedy anymore because of COVID, it's like, I don't want to say gone away, but it's like, yeah, doing the set today, it was rough. It was definitely rough. And then it was frustrating because it was just like, I know I'm better than this. Like, I know I've done better than this. And what makes it hard is that, like, if this was pre-COVID, if I had a set that was rough, then it would be like, okay, I'll just bounce back with the next show. It's fine. Whereas now it's like, I don't know when the next show is. So.
And you're single, right? Do you have any roommates? Or you got your dog?
Yeah. I'm single. I have my dog, and I don't have any roommates. So it's just like.
You ever like geek out and like perform for your dog and stuff?
It hasn't gotten to that point yet. But it is definitely when I'm hanging out with people now, I've noticed, like, for example, when I've gone on dates, I've noticed that, like, for me, the objective of the date is not to, like, create a romantic connection. For me, it's like, I got to get laughs out of somebody.
Yeah. But it can't be anything that you put on YouTube, though, because then she'll bust you.
Yes. Like that, or it's like... It's like most men, like when they go on dates, they just want to fuck. For me, I'm just trying to get 2 to 3 hours of laughs. That's what I'm trying to do. This is the drug. I miss it. I need it back. I need strangers to laugh at me again.
Yeah. So one of the reasons this conversation has been so helpful for me is because your strength is my weakness, which is stage presence and being comfortable. Because I'm a very written comic, like in a bad way, right? So. My goal is always to have more of that connection like you have, because with you it's a dialogue. With me, on my bad nights it's a monologue, right? So it's talking to the audience, but you, it's like a conversation. So it's something I really admire about the stand-up that you do.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would say too, comedy is very much in an ideal world. Not an ideal world, but like ideally. A comic will have a perfect mixture of amazing writing and amazing stage presence. If you do not have one, you have to overcompensate. Not overcompensate, but you have to compensate by being really good at the other. So if you have bad stage, there are comics who are very successful comics who their stage presence is very awkward. It's very like, I don't want to say bad, but it's just very much just like stand still. They're holding the microphone and they talk.
And it's weird. You can tell like the jokes are well written and they're
right.
well timed, but there's something that's not connected.
Right. Like their stage presence is quote unquote bad, but their writing is so funny that they're hilarious comedians. Just like how there's comedians who their stage presence is like, it feels like they could say anything and you're laughing because their stage presence has drawn you in that much. But then their writing, like if you, like there's comedians who, when you listen to their album, you haven't laughed at a single joke because it's not funny. But then when you see that same comedian in person, you're dying laughing.
Yeah.
And it's like the writing didn't change, but it's just something about being in the room and feeling their energy. It just makes you feel comfortable and looser and you laugh. So it's like in comedy, ideally you have both stage presence and great writing. But if you can only have one, then like if you're really good at stage presence, like work on your writing. Like don't be like, oh well, I'm not gonna be a writer. But like at least recognize like this is what's helping me get by. So like while I improve on my writing, I also need to make sure my stage presence is perfect. Just like how if your writing's really good, but you don't feel like you'll ever be that big energy person, that's fine. You just have to make sure your writing can compensate for the fact that you're like a monotone, like stay in one spot kind of person.
Yeah, and stage presence is a great way that you went about describing that. So that's always been my weak point is stage presence. And so what we did, especially when the quarantine started and I wasn't able to perform in front of live audiences anymore, I set up my kids during dinner time, and because they're like buckled into their seats and like have like supervise and everything. So I kind of have to watch them. So I was like, all right, I gotta watch them, I gotta supervise them. And I might as well like practice my act because they aren't really, it's like you at that age, it's like you can say anything to them and it's like basically all the same.
Right.
But they're not gonna laugh at the punchlines because they don't get them. So the only way the kids are gonna laugh is if you have like insanely exaggerated facial expression.
Right.
You're like, you have to be very, very animated to hold their attention, and not to be disrespectful at all. But when you're at a comedy club, like the attention spans are not really a there's alcohol, there's a long day, and so like you gotta hold that attention somehow.
Yeah. And there's added pressure too, because it's like when there's like something about when someone's on stage where it's just like people are just kind of like folding their arms and going, make me laugh. And it's like that weird thing of like how some jokes will be so funny in a conversation, but the second you go on stage, it just isn't. And like obviously there's factors of like context, things like that, but it's like there's just something about like, where it's like what makes something funny changes the second you go on stage. Like if we're just chilling in a hallway cracking jokes and I give you like all of this context, it'll be funny. And if I go on stage and give that exact same context, but it may not work though. And it's just like that's another aspect of comedy, of just recognizing, like, you'll be like joking with your friends, you say something funny, it gets a big laugh, you're like, okay, then you write that down, and then it doesn't work on stage. It's just like figuring out, is this actually funny or is this just conversationally funny? And there's nothing more frustrating than something being hilarious in conversation and on stage it just eats a big dick. And it's just like, I guess this is just conversation, whether I like it or not, it's conversationally funny.
Yeah. Awesome. So when you have some rituals to help calm yourself down before you step on stage, right? Like you blast music, you're like writing jokes out and stuff just to help calm the nerves. You do that before open mics and before shows, or just like one or the other?
I would say depending on the show, I do a ritual. If it's a show that's like where it's like, okay, I feel some pressure, I'll definitely listen to music to hype me up.
Whatever, you never look like you do. Like every time I've seen you perform a lot, and every time I see you, it looks like not that you don't care, but it looks like you, like not I mean, with no disrespect, but it looks like you just rolled out of bed and you just like, all right, and then you just go right into it. And it's just it's like it looks like you don't require any preparation. That's how comfortable you look when you hold the microphone. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's definitely, that was one thing that held me back when I was first, doing comedy, was like I would just be so in my head about doing comedy, and like the prepping was what helped me be in my head. So like if I felt like if I was just loose, it felt like I was increasing my chances of doing better because I would be loose on stage. So like that's why oftentimes like at shows or mics, like right before I go up, I'm just shooting the shit with like whoever I know who I'm tight with. Because like just that fact of like, yo, we're hanging out, we're talking, oh shit, I gotta go up. Like usually for the most part, I'll know, like I'll go into the club and be like, this is my usual, I'm doing 10, so this is my usual 10, so I know what to do. I don't have to order my set, like I know what to do. Or this is my usual 15, I'll know what to do. If it's like 20 on, then I'll be like, all right, hold on, let me make sure that this joke's this many minutes, this joke's that many minutes, let me make sure I have enough time and stuff. Or if it's a mic, it's like, this week I'm working on this joke, so I'm just gonna do that. And like on my way, I'll maybe like listen to a recording of what that joke was like last time I did it, so I can figure out, okay, don't do this, I'll do this, let me add this, I forgot to do this. And
that doesn't give you like analysis paralysis before you step on stage?
It's one of those where it's like, it's another thing too, I can never, this isn't I recommend you do this is just more like just the person who I am. I'm never able to do a joke the same exact way again. There's always something about my brain that like, whenever I can't memorize stuff. I get the idea of it and I just say the idea. So it's like, and for me too, like that helps me stay loose, where it's like, it doesn't feel like I'm just pressing play on video. Like it feels more natural. So like, that's why I'm not someone who like, you see me like writing making notes beforehand or trying to rehearse the words. But that's the thing though, everyone's ritual is different, and you got to do whatever ritual works for you. For me personally, that ritual of writing my jokes down before I go up doesn't work for me, because then I end up being in my head about the wording, and then I fuck up the wording because I was so like, I got to stay to a script rather than just like, yo, just let the words come out.
Pretty sure that like 90% of comics would be more your style too, and would agree with you on that. And then you have a few outliers like Robert Pidde. He like when I first met the guy, like I would see him as like every time he'd get on stage, he like I would see him practicing it word for word, and he'd get up and it's word for word, and you know that every single word is written out, but it doesn't come across as unnatural. And like you can still do it that way, but you can still make it natural. And you put him and Jerry Seinfeld next to each other, and they're twins, because Seinfeld's the same way. It's like you can tell everything is written out, like and the pauses and the timing and everything is pre-planned and happens 100% according to plan, but it's beautiful and it's an art that just lands. I don't know. I think it's a different way to get there, because we're all designed differently and we're all wired differently in terms of how we best operate. But no, I think most comics would agree with where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, for example, like with Pidde, like, yeah, that's like, just like I was saying before, like whatever your ritual is. And for some comics, they need to do that. They need to do like, I say every word for word. And that's why it's like, there's no right ritual. There's like, and whatever comic you talk to, they're gonna tell you their way is the way to do it because it's their way. But like that's what works for Pidde, and
works really well for him.
And it works. And if it makes you do well, then do what you got to do for your ritual.
Yeah.
And for me personally, that's why I don't do that, because I know I get so in my head about the wording. Whereas usually, I mean, obviously if you do a joke enough, you know what words you need to do, and it will come off as a script. But like, I would say when I'm first figuring out the joke, I won't worry about the wording. Once I've done a joke enough, I know what to do. And typically, for the most part, the wording will be the same 90% of the time. But it's like, really the only time that I have a ritual is like, if I feel like I have nerves about the show and I can't write those nerves off, like I can't just get out of it, then I'll listen to music that kind of hypes me up and like makes me feel like a bad bitch and all that. And then I go on stage and try to like take the confidence from the music that I'm listening to and then keep it on stage and not let my nerves get me. But like, even if I go on stage and that doesn't work and I still have nervousness, usually once the first couple jokes land, then I get into my groove and I feel a little bit more looser.
Hey, podcast. My son and I are editing the podcast that Chris and I just recorded. He is very helpful with this. So I'm sure that all of you enjoyed that interview with Chris as much as I did. I definitely took a lot away from it. I don't know if you caught it, but the superset that we were talking about, Chris is not aware that we call this a superset, or at least he's probably not. But at supersetyourlife.com, we define a superset as any two opposing or seemingly unrelated challenges that enhance the results of the other. It's just like the gym. It's just like a bench press and doing curls. If you do curls in between your sets on the bench press, you're gonna be able to bench more, which is weird and it's really counterintuitive. So how does Chris do that? Chris is a stand-up comedian and he's very good at what he does. And so when he performs and when he writes and when he has success in one area, that makes him more fulfilled when he's playing with his dog, for example. The guy loves his dog, so follow his Instagram profile and you will notice that. And so when he does that, that's a form of recharging. And so those are two completely different, unrelated activities, but both of them are better because he does both of them. And society will tell you that you need to balance everything and that you need to pick one or the other, but you need a certain amount of energy expenditure and a certain amount of energy renewal. There needs to be an oscillation and a counterbalance, a rhythm going back and forth. So anyway, with that, I'm going to turn things over to my lovely, beautiful wife. She is going to leave you guys with some closing remarks and some housekeeping. She is the CEO of supersetyourlife.com. I'm going to pass it over to her. Love you guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
God bless.
podcast listeners, for joining us on this episode. If you found this helpful or entertaining, we just ask you would please share this podcast and help spread the word. To make sure you don't miss future weekly episodes, you can subscribe to the podcast, and it would mean the world to Colt and I if you would leave a rating or a review on iTunes or whatever platform you're listening on. We will not be setting up on Patreon or any other service for donation. This content is our gift to you. If you would like to support the show, we do invite you to our website, supersetyourlife.com, where you will find our retail pages for our very own School Bells workout equipment line, hats, t-shirts, coaching services, and Colt's stand-up comedy booking information. On the website, you will also find the link to subscribe to our weekly newsletter to be informed of new product announcements, sales, and all information to be up to date for what's going on. Finally, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at supersetyourlife.com. Thanks again, and God bless.